April 17 2018 marked the tragic end of Chloe Garvey's young life, as the dark secrets of her family's perfect facade unraveled into a night of unimaginable horror. In the peaceful suburb of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Garvey family was known for their seemingly perfect life. Nathaniel Nate Garvey, a 47-year-old financial consultant, had built a successful career, earning the respect and admiration of his peers. Nate was the kind of man who seemed to have everything under control: his career, his family, and his reputation. He drove a sleek, black Mercedes-Benz that always shone as if it had just rolled off the lot. His office, filled with awards and framed degrees, was a testament to his professional success. Nate's wife, Eleanor "Ellie" Garvey, was 44 years old and a well-known figure in their social circle. She was an interior designer with a refined taste that made her the go-to person for anyone looking to redecorate their homes. Ellie was elegant, always dressed in the latest fashion, and she was known for her charity work, which included organizing lavish fundraisers for various causes. She drove a white Range Rover and was often seen at the country club or the local farmers market, where she mingled with other well-to-do residents of Lancaster. The couple had two children. Chloe, Ellie's daughter from her first marriage, was a 19-year-old college student who had inherited her mother's striking looks and love for creativity. Chloe had a passion for photography, and her Instagram account, with over 10,000 followers, was filled with artistic shots that showcased her talent. She was the envy of many of her peers, not just for her looks but for the seemingly perfect life she led. Chloe was in her second year of college, studying art, and she often used her free time to explore new photography techniques, capturing the beauty of nature, urban landscapes, and sometimes candid moments of her family. Then there was Ben, the 10-year-old son of Nate and Ellie, who idolized his big sister. Ben was a bright and cheerful boy, always full of energy and curiosity. He loved spending time with Chloe, whether it was helping her set up her photography equipment or just playing video games together. But behind this picture-perfect facade, a dark secret was festering, one that would soon tear the family apart. Chloe was hiding a secret that no one could have imagined, a secret that would ultimately lead to her tragic demise. It all began innocently enough. Nate Garvey, her stepfather, had always been a supportive figure in her life. After her biological father had left when she was young, Nate stepped in, providing the stability and security she desperately needed. At first, his compliments on her looks seemed like typical fatherly praise. "You're growing up to be such a beautiful young woman," he would say, and Chloe, starved for male attention, soaked it up. But as time went on, those compliments began to take on a different tone, one that made Chloe uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. At first, it was just a brush of his hand against hers, a hug that lingered a little too long, or a touch on her back that made Chloe feel uneasy. Nate, however, was always quick to dismiss any discomfort she showed, convincing her that it was all in her head, that he was just being affectionate because he cared for her. Chloe, desperate for validation and afraid of losing the only father figure she had ever truly known, tried to believe him. But as time went on, the boundary between fatherly affection and something much more sinister began to blur in ways that Chloe couldn't ignore. Nate's behavior became more overt and bold, especially when they were alone in the house. He would find excuses to be close to Chloe, always making sure Ellie and Ben were out of the house. These moments of isolation became more frequent. Nate started entering Chloe's room without knocking, often under the pretense of checking in on her or offering to help with her photography. But his presence became increasingly intrusive. He would sit on her bed too close for comfort and sometimes would lie down next to her, under the guise of just resting, while she worked on her laptop. Chloe would try to keep her distance, moving to her desk or the other side of the room, but Nate was always there, a shadow she couldn't escape. One day when Chloe was home alone working on a photography assignment, Nate saw an opportunity he couldn't resist. He entered her room and closed the door behind him, locking it, a small, subtle action that made Chloe's heart race with fear. He complimented her on how beautiful she looked, his tone more suggestive than ever before. Chloe, feeling trapped, tried to laugh it off, hoping to diffuse the situation, but Nate wasn't deterred. He moved closer to her, placing his hands on her shoulders and began massaging them, a gesture that might have seemed innocent enough to an outsider but felt wrong, predatory even in that moment. Chloe froze, her mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. But Nate had already decided what would happen next. He started to talk about how he had noticed she was growing up, becoming a woman, and how proud he was of her. His words were laced with an unsettling mix of fatherly pride and something much darker. Chloe felt sick to her stomach as she realized what he was leading up to, but she felt powerless to stop it. Nate leaned in closer, his breath hot on her neck, and began kissing her, first on the cheek, then moving towards her lips. Chloe, horrified, turned her head away, trying to push him off, but Nate was stronger. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him, and kissed her full on the lips, a kiss that was anything but fatherly. Chloe's mind screamed for her to fight back, to scream, to do anything, but her body betrayed her, frozen in shock and disbelief. Nate's assault didn't stop there. Emboldened by Chloe's paralysis, he began to touch her more intimately, his hands roaming her body as he whispered sickening reassurances that it was okay, that he loved her, and that this was their secret. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, and she finally managed to push him away. But Nate only smiled, telling her not to worry, that they would both enjoy it more next time. He left her room as casually as if nothing had happened, leaving Chloe in a state of utter devastation. She sat there trembling, her mind a whirlwind of guilt, shame, and fear. She felt dirty, violated, and completely alone. The man she had looked up to, the man she had trusted, had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. From that day on, Chloe lived in constant fear of when Nate would strike again. He continued to make inappropriate advances, each one more brazen than the last. He would touch her when no one was looking, whispering horrible things in her ear whenever they were alone. He even started to dictate what she should wear, encouraging her to dress in a way that made her feel exposed and uncomfortable. Chloe's life became a nightmare, where every moment at home was spent walking on eggshells, trying to avoid Nate's advances, yet knowing deep down that there was no escape as long as she lived under the same roof as him. The secret that had started as a twisted romance in Nate's mind had now devolved into something far more sinister, leaving Chloe trapped in a cycle of abuse that she feared she would never escape. Nate's obsession with Chloe became all-consuming. He began monitoring her every move, demanding to know where she was going and who she was with at all times. He checked her phone, read her messages, and even followed her on the rare occasions she managed to leave the house. Chloe's friends noticed that she had become distant, but when they asked her about it, she would brush it off, too ashamed and afraid to tell them the truth. Nate had complete control over her life, and he made sure she knew it. He would remind her constantly that if she ever tried to tell anyone what was happening, he would ruin her. He threatened to expose her, to make everyone believe that she was the one who had seduced him, not the other way around. The fear of being blamed, of being shamed, kept Chloe silent. Chloe's photography, once her greatest passion, became a hollow pursuit. Nate had tainted it by involving himself in every aspect of her work, insisting on accompanying her on shoots and critiquing her photos in ways that always made her feel inadequate. He would suggest poses that made Chloe uncomfortable, pushing her to take more mature shots, which he claimed would help her grow as an artist. But Chloe knew better. These were not the suggestions of a mentor, but the demands of a predator. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by Nate at every turn, and her once vibrant spirit was slowly being extinguished. Chloe's life, once full of promise and creativity, was now overshadowed by the darkness of Nate's control, leaving her a shell of the person she used to be. Ellie, still unaware of the full extent of what was happening, noticed the drastic change in Chloe, but couldn't understand the cause. She saw her daughter growing more isolated, more withdrawn, but every time she tried to reach out, Chloe would pull away, retreating further into herself. Ellie's heart ached for her daughter, but she was at a loss for what to do. Nate, ever the manipulator, played the role of the concerned father, suggesting that Chloe was just going through a phase, that she needed space to figure things out. He even suggested that Ellie was being too overprotective, that she needed to let Chloe make her own mistakes and learn from them. Ellie, though deeply concerned, didn't want to push Chloe away further, so she reluctantly agreed, not realizing that she was being manipulated by the very man who was causing Chloe's pain. As Nate tightened his grip on Chloe, he also managed to deceive Ellie, keeping her in the dark while he continued his sinister behavior unchecked. As the summer drew to a close, Chloe's fear and guilt became unbearable. She knew she had to end things with Nate, but she was terrified of what he might do if she tried. She began to distance herself from him, avoiding being alone with him as much as possible. She took longer walks, spent more time at the local coffee shop, and even started attending extra classes at college just to stay out of the house. But Nate, sensing her withdrawal, became even more possessive. He would show up unannounced at her college, waiting for her outside her classes, claiming that he was just concerned about her safety. Chloe's anxiety skyrocketed, and she felt like there was no place she could go where she was truly safe. Chloe's attempts to escape Nate's control only pushed him to become more obsessive, driving the situation toward an inevitable and tragic confrontation. The turning point came one evening when Chloe decided she couldn't take it anymore. She had to find a way out, no matter the cost. She confided in a close friend, someone she trusted completely, but she was careful not to reveal too much. She simply said that she was in trouble, that someone was hurting her, and that she needed help. Her friend, sensing the desperation in Chloe's voice, offered to let her stay with them for a few days, to give her some space to think and plan her next move. Chloe agreed, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. But as she prepared to leave, Nate caught wind of her plans. Nate's discovery of Chloe's attempt to escape set off a chain of events that would lead to the most horrifying night of their lives. Nate confronted Chloe in her room, his demeanor colder and more threatening than ever before. He accused her of trying to leave him, of betraying their special bond. Chloe, terrified and cornered, tried to deny it, but Nate wasn't fooled. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip so tight that it left bruises, and told her that she would never leave him. He made it clear that if she ever tried to run, he would destroy her, expose her to the world as the one who had seduced him, and make sure she lost everything. Chloe was devastated, realizing that her hope of escape had been crushed. Nate's control over her was absolute, and she felt more trapped than ever. The once vibrant and hopeful Chloe was now a prisoner in her own home, with no way out and no one to turn to for help. She became distant from her mother, avoiding eye contact and spending long hours locked in her room. Ellie noticed the changes in her daughter and husband, but she struggled to understand what was happening. She attributed Chloe's behavior to typical teenage rebellion and Nate's increasingly erratic actions to the stress of his job. Ellie was known for her intuition, but even she couldn't have imagined the dark secret that was festering within her own home. The once harmonious family dynamic was beginning to crack, and it wouldn't be long before those cracks would become chasms. The pressure of keeping their relationship a secret was taking its toll on Chloe. The guilt gnawed at her every day, and she started to feel trapped. Nate's behavior was becoming more possessive, and the relationship, which had once felt exciting and forbidden, now felt suffocating and dangerous. As the summer came to an end, Chloe knew she had to end things with Nate. She began to pull away, avoiding his advances and spending more time outside the house, often taking long drives in her Toyota Corolla to clear her mind. But Nate, consumed by his obsession, refused to let her go. He began to make subtle threats, reminding her of the power he held over her. He warned her that if she ever tried to end things or told anyone, he could ruin her life, expose her as a willing participant, or worse, claim she had seduced him. The once thrilling secret had now become a deadly trap for Chloe, one that she feared she might never escape from. Ellie's intuition, which had been her guiding force for so many years, was now sounding alarms she couldn't ignore. Nate's behavior was becoming more erratic, more controlling. He was overly attentive to Chloe, always finding excuses to be near her, and he often disappeared without explanation, sometimes late at night, leaving Ellie to wonder what was going on. Chloe, who had once been the light of Ellie's life, was now a shadow of her former self. She was skittish, withdrawn, and seemed to avoid her mother at every turn. Ellie's concern grew by the day, but she struggled to connect the dots. Was this just teenage rebellion? Was Chloe hiding something? Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, but she couldn't have guessed just how wrong things were. But soon it became clear that the changes in Chloe and Nate were more than just passing phases. They were signs of something far darker. Nate's possessiveness reached a new and terrifying level. He began to make more overt threats to Chloe, using the power he held over her to keep her in line. He reminded her of everything he had done for her, the gifts, the trips, the support with her photography, and warned her that if she ever tried to end their relationship, he could make her life a living hell. Chloe was now living in a constant state of fear. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she didn't know how to get out of the situation she was in. Every time she tried to distance herself from Nate, he would find a way to pull her back in, whether through manipulation, threats, or even violence. The once thrilling secret had become a nightmare, and Chloe was desperate to escape. The pressure was building, and it was only a matter of time before it all exploded. One evening, while Ellie was out of town visiting her elderly parents, Nate saw his opportunity. He cornered Chloe in her room, demanding her attention. The situation quickly escalated as Nate ignored Chloe's protests, pushing her further than he ever had before. Chloe tried to resist, but Nate's physical strength and determination overpowered her. What followed was a violent and forced encounter that left Chloe traumatized and terrified. This event was a turning point for Chloe. She knew she couldn't go on like this, and she began to consider the unthinkable, exposing the truth, no matter what the consequences might be. She started to secretly gather evidence, taking screenshots of texts, saving emails, and even recording some of their conversations. But Chloe's attempts to free herself from Nate's grip only deepened the danger she was in. When Ellie returned home, she immediately noticed the change in Chloe's demeanor. Her daughter, who had been distant before, was now completely withdrawn, avoiding any interaction with her mother. Ellie's concern turned to suspicion, and she began to dig deeper. She started going through Nate's things, his computer, his phone, his emails, looking for any clue that might explain what was happening to her family. What Ellie found shook her to her core. Texts, emails, and photos revealed a relationship that was far more than just inappropriate. It was sinister. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her life with, was a predator who had been abusing her daughter right under her nose. Ellie's world came crashing down as she realized the horrifying truth. Her husband had been abusing her daughter, and she had been blind to it all. Overcome with rage and disbelief, Ellie confronted Nate one night after putting Ben to bed. She had spent the entire day rehearsing what she would say, how she would confront him with the evidence she'd found. But when the moment came, all her carefully planned words were forgotten, replaced by a raw, seething anger that she could barely control. Ellie demanded answers, showing Nate the evidence she had uncovered. Nate, realizing he was cornered, first tried to gaslight Ellie, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that Chloe was lying, that Ellie had misunderstood what she had found. But Ellie was relentless. She pushed Nate until he snapped, admitting to the affair, but blaming Chloe, accusing her of being seductive and manipulative. Ellie's confrontation with Nate was explosive, shattering any illusion of control he had over the situation. Horrified by what she overheard, Chloe attempted to flee the house. She knew that if she didn't get out now, she might never get another chance. But Nate, in a fit of panic, stopped her. A physical altercation ensued, during which Nate violently restrained Chloe, injuring her in the process. Ellie, realizing the true danger they were in, tried to intervene, but Nate's desperation and fear of losing control turned him into a monster. He threatened both Chloe and Ellie, stating that if they tried to expose him, he would make sure they paid dearly. He warned Ellie that he could hurt Ben, that he could ruin their lives in ways they couldn't even imagine. The family was now trapped in a nightmarish situation, with Nate's threats looming over them like a dark cloud. The once perfect family was now held together by fear and threats, with no escape in sight. Nate, now fully unhinged, presented Ellie and Chloe with an ultimatum: keep the secret or face dire consequences. He threatened to hurt Ben if they didn't comply, knowing that Ellie would do anything to protect her son. Chloe was terrified, but Ellie, though frightened, began to plan her next move. She realized that they needed to escape this living hell, but she had to be careful. Nate was watching their every move. Ellie knew she couldn't confront Nate head-on, not without risking everything. She needed to be smart, to find a way to bring him down without putting her children in more danger. She started to secretly gather more evidence, documenting Nate's abusive behavior, his threats, and the relationship with Chloe. She reached out to a lawyer, a close family friend, and began to put together a case against Nate. She documented everything, texts, emails, photos, and even recorded some of their conversations. She also reached out to a trusted friend in law enforcement, hoping to set a trap that would catch Nate in the act. Ellie's plan was to gather enough evidence to ensure that Nate couldn't escape justice. But as she moved forward, the danger only intensified. But as Ellie tried to protect her children, Nate's paranoia and violence escalated, turning their home into a ticking time bomb. Nate, sensing that Ellie was plotting against him, became increasingly paranoid. He started monitoring Ellie's movements, checking her phone, and even following her when she left the house. His paranoia fed his growing instability, and he became more erratic, lashing out at Chloe and Ellie with increasing violence. The once charming and composed man was now a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Ellie was terrified, but she couldn't back down now. She knew that the only way to protect her children was to see her plan through to the end. The tension in the Garvey household was unbearable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The final straw came one fateful night. Nate overheard Ellie on the phone with her lawyer, discussing the evidence she had gathered. Enraged and feeling betrayed, Nate lost all control. He stormed into Ellie's office, demanding to know what she was planning. The confrontation quickly turned violent, with Nate physically assaulting Ellie. Chloe, hearing the commotion, tried to intervene, but Nate turned his wrath on her as well. He pushed her against the wall, threatening to kill her if she didn't stay quiet. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Ellie knew that if she didn't act fast, they would all be in grave danger. Nate's violence had reached a terrifying peak, and the Garvey family was on the brink of disaster. In a moment of sheer desperation, Nate snapped completely. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, stabbed Chloe in front of Ellie. The brutal act was both horrifying and surreal as Ellie watched in shock and horror, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Chloe, mortally wounded, collapsed to the floor, her life slipping away as Ellie desperately tried to stop the bleeding. Nate, realizing what he had done, stood frozen, the reality of his actions slowly sinking in. The once perfect family had been torn apart in the most gruesome way imaginable. The nightmarish violence that had consumed the Garvey family had reached its tragic and bloody climax. In the immediate aftermath of the brutal murder, Ellie managed to call 911, her voice shaking as she pleaded for help. Nate, still in shock, didn't resist as Ellie's friend from law enforcement arrived on the scene, arresting him without incident. The house, once a symbol of the perfect family, was now a crime scene, with police swarming the property and paramedics desperately trying to save Chloe's life. But it was too late. Chloe was pronounced dead at the scene, her young life cut short by the man who was supposed to protect her. The media descended on the story, turning it into a sensationalized tragedy that captivated the nation. The Garvey family, once the epitome of success and happiness, was now the subject of whispers and rumors as the dark secrets of their seemingly perfect life came to light. The true extent of the horror that had unfolded within the Garvey household was only just beginning to be revealed. As the investigation unfolded, the full extent of Nate's manipulation, abuse, and control over Chloe came to light. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and family members revealed the dark secrets that had been hidden behind Garvey's perfect facade. Ellie, though devastated, cooperated fully with the authorities, determined to see justice served for her daughter. Nate's trial became a national spectacle, with the prosecution painting him as a cold, calculating predator who preyed on his stepdaughter and manipulated his family for years. The defense tried to argue that Nate was mentally unstable, driven to his actions by a combination of stress, paranoia, and a midlife crisis. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury quickly found Nate guilty of murder. The man who had once been the pillar of his community was now a convicted murderer, his life in ruins. Nate was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ellie, though forever scarred by the loss of her daughter and the betrayal of her husband, tried to rebuild her life with Ben. She moved away from Lancaster, seeking a fresh start in a new city where they could leave the past behind. The final scenes of this tragic story show Ellie visiting Chloe's grave, leaving flowers and promising her daughter that she would never be forgotten. Despite the horror of what happened, Ellie found a small measure of peace, knowing that Nate would never be able to hurt anyone again. The story of the Garvey family serves as a chilling reminder that even the most perfect facades can hide the darkest secrets.